Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We'll get going on this first session in the tent today. This is a session on landscape recovery. Landscape recovery is one of the suite of the environmental land management schemes. It's the kind of top tier scheme of the three, and it's very different to anything that has gone before, really, in the history of agri-environment. The landscape recovery projects are large scale, they're long-term funded, up to about 20 years. They're bespoke. It's a kind of design your own scheme. There's no prescriptions, and the project development phase is well supported. And they have the ambition of achieving blended finance, private investment within them as well. I think it's fair to say landscape recovery has raised the level of debate around land use or land use frameworks. It's raised the level of debate around the environment versus food production in some quarters, and it is certainly raising the level of debate and thinking around the use of private finance. The first projects were awarded in September 2022. That's the first phase. They were oversubscribed, and eventually 22 projects were supported. And Defra are anticipating a spend of around 50 million on landscape recovery by 2025, and obviously significantly more beyond that. So now to our speakers. We have a panel of 4. And we're going to start off with Sam Burford. Sam is the landscape recovery policy lead for Defra. He leads on scheme design, and he will be part of the panel which will look at the second round applications for landscape recovery. And as you can see, he's from a farming background, farmer's son from the Peak District. So good feet on the ground experience there. We'll then have Nicola Robinson. Nicola is the EA lead for the landscape recovery projects, for those projects which are focused on river and stream restoration, which is about half of the 22. So EA administer those, and then Natural England administer the remainder of the projects which are focused currently on species. We then have Tim Field. Tim is the founder and the facilitator of the North East Cotswold Farmer Cluster, and that covers 40,000 hectares made up of about 135 farmers, and he is the project director for their own landscape recovery project. He's also founder and board member of Agricology, that brilliant resource. Hence, okay. And then finally, we have Tim Coates, and Tim's the third generation farmer who is transitioning, I think, aggressively to regenerative agriculture. He's also an SFI, a pilot farmer, and Tim is on the steering group of the North East Cotswold Landscape Recovery Project, and he's also co-founder of the agricultural brand Oxbury, being advertised here. Okay, so without any more ado, we'll hand over to Sam to kick us off. Thank you, Sam.
So, distinguishing features of landscape recovery. Geoff's already covered most of these, so I won't dwell on them. Essentially 4 things as set out on the slide here. It's a competitive scheme, so the application process is competitive. There's several stages, so market engagement, which we ran for round 2 in February to March this year, which is where we get feedback from everyone on our proposals and then change them if we think necessary. We've then got the application stage, which we're in now for round 2, and the evaluation stage through to enrolment, which is run by delivery partners EA and Natural England, and then there's the project development phase and the 20-year implementation phase, or longer if necessary. And that phase is the blended funded phase, so some private investment is necessary, and then for the project development phase, that's fully funded by Defra and the delivery partners. We're currently in a pilot. It's a bit of a loose term for this scheme, so the projects that are in for the first round and the second round are in some ways pilots because we're learning how the scheme works, but they're still going to go into these long-term agreements. It's not a sort of short-term pilot, basically. So a quick recap on round one. We had two themes, river restoration and species recovery. We had eligibility requirements that were slightly stricter, so 500 to 5,000 hectares with a 5,000 hectare cap on project size. Broadly contiguous projects, so as connected as possible essentially. We changed that from strictly contiguous, which was our original proposition, recognising that land ownership is quite complex and these projects can be quite hard to make up strictly contiguous. Any land in England's eligible, and any group or individual. Public bodies have to apply in collaboration with private land managers, and that's just to avoid sort of circulating money around public bodies. And then it was quite a successful round, the first round, so we were probably expecting about 40 applications. We got 51 really good quality applications, and we took 22 through, which was more than the 15 that we originally planned, just because there were so many good ones that we decided to take on more. So a quick overview of the projects across the UK, or across England rather. We got a pretty good spread, as you can see here. We've started going around visiting these projects. You can see some of the pictures from various visits and just some of the farmer groups involved in the projects. There's obviously some gaps. We'd like to fill those gaps, but we haven't introduced any sort of criteria in round two to specifically try and fill them. We're just going to see how it goes and then adapt the scheme over time. But yeah, as I said, you know, pretty good spread for a first round. We got a good mix of applications from sort of upland and lowland areas as well. So round two, focus is slightly different. We're looking at net zero, particularly this round, protected sites and wildlife rich habitat. So net zero can be anything from peatland restoration, trees and woodland creation, also management or creation of other carbon sequestering habitats, and then also carbon sequestering practices, so things like regenerative agriculture, also very much in scope. And the criteria, which I'll cover in a bit, are quite sort of broad in term, and it's about pitching to us what your project's going to deliver. Protected sites, I think there's 6 that are in scope, nationally protected sites, so triple SIs, SACs, SPAs, Ramsar wetlands, what's the other one, National Nature Reserves, and also intertidal MCZs. And then wildlife rich habitat outside triple SIs is and protected sites is also very much in scope, and there's 2 lists of wildlife rich habitat which you can find in the guidance. Also, projects are provided required to provide larger benefits than just those. So we're looking for various co-benefits, whether they be environmental, social, or whatever else. And then we're looking for up to 25 projects this round, so a few more. That's about as many as we can manage at the moment. It's nothing to do with ambition, it's just what we think we can deliver as we're learning how the scheme works. And then timescales, so we launched on the 18th of May. Minister Spencer launched second round at the Devon County Show. We got 18-week window this time instead of 16 weeks in the first round. We've extended it slightly because we recognise it sort of falls in, it would have fallen just after the end of August, and we were worried about kind of any overlap with harvesting, so of the end of the sort of application window, which is often when people tend to do a lot of the work. And then evaluation, we've extended to 10 weeks, recognising it took a bit longer last time. Enrolment, similar, we've extended a little bit, and then we should be into the project development phase from sort of spring next year with those round 2 projects. And then quickly, eligibility, broadly the same, except we've removed that 5,000 hectare cap. So any landowner or land manager and any land in England's eligible. It can be inside or outside protected areas, it can be common land, and it can also be in an existing agri-environment scheme, and we'll work with you during the project development phase to figure out how to sort of work around any issues that existing agreements might involve, whether that be terminating the agreement early if you go into implementation, or finding other workarounds. And then also you can put all of your holding in if you want to, but in most cases these will be collaborative projects where you're just putting a few of your parcels into it to build up a bigger project. Criteria, we've got 6 this year. Most of them similar. Obviously, they reflect those focal outcomes, so a lot of weighting towards net zero and biodiversity, particularly protected sites, and then wildlife-rich habitat outside protected sites. We've also introduced the food criterion, so getting people and projects to start thinking about the impact they're going to have on food production, whether that be sort of positive or negative, and particularly on sustainable food production as well. So we're trying to get them to think about that early, as well as going to be assessing it during the project development phase and on into implementation if they get there. Social impacts and costs broadly similar to round one. So main changes: improved guidance. There's a single competition. We had different competitions than for river projects and species projects in round one, but this time we're putting them all into one pot because we decided it just added complexity unnecessarily. And then we've tried to simplify the criteria. Hopefully you'll appreciate that, but it might not be the case. Again, with these things, we're just going to have to keep trying to learn from what works and what doesn't. What we have done is also introduced a cap on project development funding. So £750,000 per project for the project development phase. That's excluding VAT. And again, we'll have to see how that works and whether that's enough to sort of get these projects ready. And then one of the probably the most significant things we've done is we've asked for things applications that are then going to be used during enrolment. Now we've run enrolment, we know what we need, so hopefully we're going to make that process a little bit slicker for the projects that are successful. Okay, I think I'm handing over to Nick here. Do you want me to?
Yeah, you click for me.
Yeah.
Thanks. Super. Morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay on the mic. Yeah. Well done for getting here on time. We only just made it. It's lovely to be here. Thanks for coming to listen about landscape recovery. And I think the first thing I want to say is that landscape recovery for me is a really exciting scheme. And so my role in the Environment Agency is to work with Defra and the projects to try and make landscape recovery, the scheme, work as well as it possibly can, but also to support the projects to make sure that they can reach their full potential. So what I'm going to do is just speak to you a little bit about how we're supporting the landscape recovery projects and how that works in terms of the delivery and the projects making progress. And then I'm going to move on and introduce just a few of the landscape recovery round one projects to you, just to give you a bit of a flavour for what the landscape recovery projects are hoping to achieve. So Environment Agency in Natural England, we're involved in the whole of landscape recovery, but our role really comes into its fruition once the successful projects have been selected by the Defra evaluation panel. And what we do is we bring those projects in to the Environment Agency in Natural England, and we help to administer the grants to them. So the first thing that happens is that we have an enrolment stage. So the successful projects, we have to check that those organisations, they have to pass our due diligence and financial checks to make sure that those organisations, that we're happy to administer a grant to them. So we do that. And then during the 10-week enrolment period, we work with the projects to make sure that the activities that they have planned for the development phase are going to be the right sorts of things to see the project move through into implementation. So we have an enrolment period. The result of that is a grant agreement. So it's for a fully funded project development phase, which can be up to 2 years. So once the projects are into that project development phase, we will work closely with them, and it's a really supportive way of working actually for landscape recovery. What we need the projects to do is all of the development before they can move into implementation. So we need them to look at what they're going to do in terms of land management, think about what their land management plan is going to be, what their long-term vision is for the projects. And then we also need them to think about some of the more complex parts of landscape recovery. So it's important that they think about their business plans, how they can blend in public and private finance together, how that's going to work. They need to think about their governance arrangements. So how is the project going to be structured, and how are the funds going to be allocated out to the participants in a fair way? So lots of work on those sorts of areas, and also work to look at communication and engagement. So for landscape recovery, it's really important that we deliver both the environmental and social benefits, but for these large scale projects, it's really important that the local community are actually bought in and supportive to try and make the projects come to fruition. Permitting and consenting can be quite challenging for large-scale projects which have to deliver a lot of environmental things. So permitting and consenting is something that we expect the projects to really dive into during the project development phase to make sure that they understand what's going to be required. Thanks, Sam. Super. Okay, so I just want to talk a bit about our delivery principles for landscape recovery. I think it's really important. So we are looking to achieve really ambitious projects. We want them to deliver as much as they can environmentally and socially. But it's also an ambitious scheme for Defra and also for the Environment Agency in Natural England. What we're trying to do here is quite different from other schemes, and it's not necessarily going to be an easy ride. So we're looking for ambitious projects, and we want the scheme to be ambitious. To do that, we need to be really flexible during the project development phase, and I think the Tims might stick up for me and say that we are trying to work in a very co-design flexible way. So we did some things wrong during enrolment. It took a bit longer than it should have done. We got a bit carried away with duplicate funding checks and things like that. We're learning, we're improving as we go. And so we have quite light touch in terms of the guidance that we're using for project development phase at the moment, because we want to see how it works. We want to learn from the projects. Each of the projects is unique and different. Their requirements are unique and different. And we want to be able to make sure landscape recovery can fit for all the different types of projects that are out there. We need to be different as well from the other schemes. We don't want to be as prescriptive with landscape recovery. We want to give the projects freedom to go out there and explore what's available for them, explore different types of funding, explore different ways of delivering. And so we're trying to be different from other schemes. And with landscape recovery, we have a real opportunity, I think, to try out different approaches with agri-environment schemes. And it's great that we have the two-way learning between the Defra bodies and also the projects themselves. So it's co-design, it's continual improvement, and we do have to remember that it is a pilot, and so we can make mistakes and do things better next time. Thanks, Sam. So I'm just going to whiz you through a few of the projects that we have in the round one for landscape recovery before I hand over to the Tims to speak about their excellent project. So the Three Dales project is in the Yorkshire Dales National Park. It's 2,600 hectares. And it involves 10 landowners, Ingleborough Estates and Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. And the focal species for this project are black grouse, curlew, ring ouzel. And the main aim of this project is to really improve the mosaic of wildlife-rich habitats and to increase the vegetation on the mountainside and restore the blanket bog. Thanks, Sam. Okay, this is another uplands project in the Lake District, the Eastern Fells project. Again, a group of farmers have come together with the RSPB and United Utilities to restore the landscape there. And actually they produce this really nice visual. So this is the visual which demonstrates what the area looks like at the moment with Haweswater there on the right hand side. And then if Sam does another click for me, we can see their vision, and it's not going to be a fast process to change the landscape in this way, but this is what they're ultimately hoping to achieve. And I think the visual is a really nice demonstration of the types of things we're hoping we can achieve through landscape recovery. So creating and restoring some woodland and scrub, extensive grazing, floodplain and wetland restoration, and all of the benefits that that's going to deliver. Thanks, Sam. Okay, and the North Norfolk project, Wilder, Wetter, Better for Nature, one of my favourite titles of all of the projects that we have. And this is a super exciting project in North Norfolk. So it's about 1,400 hectares, and it's a source to sea project. So these really valuable chalk stream habitats, the River Hun, the Burn, the Stiffkey and the Glaven, super important chalk stream habitats that are really valuable freshwater habitats. And what this group are hoping to do here is really to reconnect the rivers and the floodplain, restore those watery habitats for the species pictured on the right and others. And it's just a super project, a really great bringing together of some really important habitat here to deliver as much as we can. So it's 16 farmers and landowners involved, so it's one of the bigger projects. With Norfolk County Council and Norfolk Rivers Trust, who have previous in terms of delivering lots of really good stuff for nature. Thanks, Sam. Okay, and my final project I wanted to speak about, and this one is a little bit different from some of the other projects. This is the Enfield Chase Restoration Project, which involves 8 tenant farmers, Enfield Council, and also Thames 21. And this was a historic hunting area that was used, hence the name Chase. And they really want to just bring back nature here. It's quite an urban area, and so there's a lot of opportunity here to improve access for nature. So it's a smaller project, 840 hectares in the green belt there, and their key species are grayling, brown trout and water vole, and potential to reintroduce those. And they really just want to restore the natural landscape, so they're talking about lots of tree planting, some wetland restoration, some stage 0 restoration, which they have previous of, and water quality improvements. So the main rivers here are Turkey Brook and Salmon Brook, which feeds into the River Lee, and there are issues there with water quality and also downstream some flood risk potential. So there's a real opportunity here to do something for both nature and something where there's an increased accessibility for the local communities. So another super project. But hopefully that's given you a nice flavour of some of the current round 1 projects. And I have to say they're a really inspiring bunch of people that we're working with on landscape recovery. And I'm really excited to see what we can deliver through this new scheme. And I'll pass over to the Tims to speak about their project.
I'll give it a go. Thanks very much. Good morning, everyone. This is slightly nerve-wracking, so I'm looking around the room and I can see about 12 of our members in here, so I've got to be careful what I say here. Not just that, but we've also got landscape recovery royalty on the front row. And I once said at a dinner party, when I was trying to describe my job, I was like, well, I'm trying to be the Jake Fiennes of North East Cotswolds. I haven't started my book yet, but let's see how that goes. Good morning. So yeah, I'm just going to give a perspective of the last couple of years of my life, which is bringing together these farms in the North East Cotswold and how we've got to where we are today. We are 50 farms, actually about 60 now, on the River Evenlode, the Dawn and the Glyme. Not to forget the Dawn and the Glyme. And that's our coverage. So you can see Oxford down in the southeast of the map. All the way up to Morton Marsh at the top of the Evenlode catchment in the northwest. And that watershed there is quite flashy. It's steep-sided. It's quite a lot of clay in there. Oxford's very prone to flooding. And there are lots of villages all the way down there and a railway line all the way down there that's very prone. We also have Thames Water in the catchment, not doing a great job with the assets. We've also seen species decline over the years due to all sorts of reasons, urbanisation, farming practice change, and so on and so forth. But that's what we're dealing with. 2.5 years ago we set up. Our founder member Sam and a number of others in the room got together and said, let's try and connect up some pollinator habitat and let's try and sort out the water quality and flooding issues. So we came together. I was at Dalesford at the time and thought that's a great idea. And that's where we got to 2 years later. So about, I think we're actually 145 members across 43,000 hectares now. I can't make this work. There we go. Point it in the right direction. And that's our landscape recovery project. The yellow shading in the middle there is the Evenlode, and that's the catchment. You've got the Charwell to the east and the Windrush to the west. This was always, I remember Tim saying when we set out to do this, this has to be farmer-led. We've got to get the farmers on side to do this. Because what we want to prove with this one is that this is applicable across the whole country. This is lowland Britain productive farming, lowland England productive farming can go hand in hand with nature recovery, flood mitigation, carbon capture and so on. Let's not leave it to islands of uplands and nature reserves. So we set about that task and started off in a small area, one tributary of the Evenlode, and then actually realised there's quite a lot of appetite all the way up the river. And so we bit off more than we could chew probably and went all the way from Morton all the way down to the Thames. And I'm just going to zone in a couple of examples of what we're doing in on those two boxes I've highlighted. Two quite different settings. But but both have a hugely important role in landscape recovery. So at the top of the catchment, as I say, flashy, steep-sided. We've got these extreme weather events hitting the ground, rushing off, draining out through these ditches that we've been putting in over the centuries, and flooding Moreton Marsh just downstream from that picture. That is the ditch line there in blue. It's predominantly pasture there, but there is still some arable. I've got to be very careful what I say because the farmer in question is in the room, and it's being farmed very sensitively, but that is not stopping Moreton from flooding. And so we start to look at the great land app layers that I'm sure many of you are accustomed to using, and start to look at what are the opportunities. We've got some amazing relic features in that catchment. You can very clearly see the ridge and furrow. But what's more important is a slightly more subtle paleo channel, the old former channel before it was ditched, that runs from the bottom right-hand corner to the top left, up the ditch line. And what we're trying to do is reconnect some of those ditches to their original floodplains and hold that water back, re-wiggle the river down those channels. Ideally not taking too much land out of production, but managing that in a more sensitive way so that we are creating more species richness in those floodplain meadows and holding the water back and stopping it flushing through quite so fast. And so this is a really interesting example of what we're up to because it's also across 3 different tenets of quite complicated landowner tenancy structure and ownership structure. And so when the chap in question sent me the email to forward on to the lawyers we've got working on this, I really could not understand it. And so this is just one of those challenges, which being part of this pilot is both a real issue and a real challenge because no one's done it so far before, but that's kind of what we signed up to. We are a pilot. Everyone will have different challenges, and we are literally being set free to go and work out how to do this. So, a nice linear feature which isn't going to impact the agricultural systems too much. The field right in the middle there is probably going to... Oh, sorry, I could go on one slide. The blue hatching is prime territory for arable reversion, low productivity, but and high value if we're going to hold back water in there and revert to some lovely floodplain meadow communities. And that is the line that we're going to try and reconnect to. At the other end of the scale, we've got several very pioneering farmers in the group, and this particular one has gone for this 35-hectare BNG project. And he's getting a bit impatient, or he's got impatient, and wasn't going to wait for November, and just said about getting his lawyers to draw up a contract to go into to recognise the BNG uplift on this particular project. 35 hectares, 200 units in West Oxfordshire, which is where we are. That's worth quite a lot if in today's prices, whatever those prices might be. And this is a staggering project that. Right in the middle reaches of the even load, where we're going to be reconnecting the river, which is really incised, really canalised, pretty poor water quality because of aforementioned Thames water, but also historical land use and mismanagement, and that's the sort of scale that we're looking at all the way down the river to reconnect that floodplain to the river to the floodplain, and look at these sorts of projects where actually 2 and 3 years. The crop's underwater. They really shouldn't be arable, but there's no justification for taking it out of arable at the moment with current prices and stewardship scheme options. So it's taking this private finance to nudge it, or the landscape recovery, and a combined project to see these sorts of projects go forward. Where am I at now with the slides? Oh, I'm going to go backwards. And this particular project is a owner-occupier, and we are piloting, not on this one, but just upstream, another owner-occupier, arable version, who is a 200-hectare farm, making the farm work, has mortgage payments to pay, is farming it hard, can't afford to take that field out of production with the current options available to him. But once we start layering the value of these different revenue streams, private finance and the public opportunities, which Tim will talk about, we can start to build a much better case. And we can only really do that at landscape scale, particularly with the new markets. And I'm going to make this opportunity to stand on the stage with the Environment Agency, which I do at every opportunity at the moment, to say we need to start valuing natural flood management better. And the Thames Valley Flood Scheme, which is a vast scheme optioneering hundreds of millions of pounds worth of investment in concrete structures to stop Oxford and Abingdon and London from flooding. But at the moment, I'm willing to put proper figures to the natural flood management that we could be doing in fields through better vegetation management. 1% increase in soil carbon. I'm going to steal Tim's slides here, but 1% increase in soil carbon, 354 cubic meters per hectare worth of water storage in that top 30 centimeters per hectare, according to Andy Neal at Rothamsted. Anyway, and so there's the major value to be had from farmers here in our nature collapse. And so that is why we came together, to try and value it all together and connect and get that incremental, the sum of the whole, or the whole being so much greater than the sum of the parts when we're looking at some of these big challenges. Anyway, I will hand over to Tim now. Oh, I should apologise. I put these slides together, 3 slides together. He was on paternity leave until 2 days ago, so apologies, Tim.
Morning, everyone. I'm going to talk ironically, not about the farming side, despite, as Tim said, when we set out to do this, saying that the most important thing was making sure that we got the right value add for farmers. So that will continue as a theme across the 3 things I'm going to talk about, which is the data and what that means, the money, the really important bit, the finance side, and all of the fun things to do with horrible phrases like corporate governance and legals, but actually highly necessary things that we have to get right. And as a pilot, we hope we're going through the pain so that future projects don't have to. I'm not going to talk through the detail of what's on this slide, so don't try and strain your eyes or anything. But what this is that we've gone across the entire catchment and we've done a range of soil sampling with Rothamsted, and we are able to essentially benchmark the soil organic matter across the entire catchment that's within landscape recovery. So to Tim's point about the water holding capacity being but one of the important matters here. This is actually just one of the soil series that's in the catchment, and it has sort of the highest soil organic matter levels at the left-hand side and the right. And so everyone in the cluster is able to understand what their relative position is and what the opportunity might be, and of course can compare the farming practices. So that's a value from a farming point of view, but for the landscape recovery, ensures that actually what we're doing is coming from a position of really robust, high quality, high integrity data. And we're doing that across all of the dimensions of natural capital, so soil carbon, biodiversity baselining, the capacity for natural flood management, and others. And it's really important when we go out and start looking for the private finance element, that we have this robust data sitting behind us and we can engage with the voluntary carbon markets, the biodiversity net gain and voluntary biodiversity markets that's emerging, and hopefully the soon to be coming natural flood management markets, which I think are going to be absolutely essential for this. So this is yet another map of our catchment, and some things in this one are a bit clearer, not least the railway line that also follows the path of the River Evenlode, which means there is a really important key stakeholder, or 2 stakeholders, that are highly impacted by the activity we're going to have by the adjustments we make. At the moment, the farmed environment is doing some work regarding natural flood management, but it can be improved. So we essentially already are slightly protecting that key piece of national infrastructure and its owner and the operator that uses it. I'm trying not to name names, but it should be pretty obvious. Are key stakeholders and beneficiaries of the activity that we're going to take. Now, it's not just them, it's also all of the settlements on here. The water that falls on my farm, which is the head of one of the rivers, and on where Andrew farms, which was on the picture earlier from Tim, after the rain has fallen, it takes 2 days for that water to find itself at the city of Oxford and 10 days in London. We can substantially slow that rate of flow and hold the water back up in the catchment through the activities we're taking. And that is, of course, of a huge amount of value to impacted communities, not least, as Tim said, the city of Oxford that floods. But we had one of the villages in the catchment flood on Boxing Day a couple of years ago, which obviously is pretty devastating for those residents. So the value of natural flood management is huge, and it's a huge area we're targeting. But we're doing that through addressing the on-farm ability of water holding capacity by increasing soil organic matter as a key pathway to achieving that goal. There are therefore actually really quite, because the value is potentially incredibly high, the insured property values in Oxford in terms of flood premiums on an annualised basis are in the hundreds of millions, that even if we start adjusting that by single-digit percentages, there's a huge amount of potential flow of funds that can come into supporting the innovations we're doing. That actually makes it quite an interesting investable opportunity for the people who want to invest in getting a return, financial return from this, these emerging environmental markets. And that's part of what Tim and I do is so our farmer members don't have to, we'll trek to nice shiny offices in London and have those kind of conversations about who might be both the investors in this project, but also the buyers of the services, the ecosystem services we're providing at the catchment level, which again is the sort of scale that means that every single individual farmer doesn't have to go out and start trying to contract. It's really important that we work aggregated way, and we take the burden off the farmer members that sit within this catchment. There's quite a lot of administration involved in a landscape recovery project, I think it's fair to say. And the project development phase is one for if you're happier behind a desk than than in the tractor cab, put your hand up in your local area to get involved in the landscape recovery project. Not the other way around. There is a lot of administrative work to do. It's a very different administrative pain to the sort of RPA administrative pain, which is just pure torture. This is actually quite, fun because the RPA aren't involved. So maybe that's it's direct to Defra stuff. So, but it does involve sort of lots of actors who are not necessarily the typical farming ones. So Tim's mentioned the legal support we're getting on this project, the financial support we're getting in terms of advice on finance, the technical advice we're getting from large engineering firms, for example, on how we're going to do the hydrological interventions on the river. That we've had to pull together quite a complicated project group that makes this happen, and we are fortunate to have been able to find most of that in our immediate local vicinity. And I can anticipate that might be difficult in different parts of the country. But again, we're here as a sort of pioneer to try and demystify some of this, and hopefully the guidance and routes to doing this will become clearer as we go forward. But the key thing here really is, again, we're doing this as farmer-led. This is still about our cluster group. It's still about the returns we can get for our farmer members, both those participating directly in the project by allowing land in, including by the type of tenure, whether they're owner-occupiers, tenants of whatever variety, whether they're in share or contract farming arrangements. It has to be something that works for everyone. It has to be at a price point where it's at least as good as any other option. And that's really the flaw. Actually, it's about making sure that we go out and really capture the full value of the ecosystem benefits that we are able to deliver through this project. And that is our watchword. We want to make sure we get a best return for our farmer members, both those directly participating, but actually the entire cluster. Going all the way back to Tim's slides here, that's who we're thinking about the whole time. This is the lot doing the heavy lifting on this particular project, but everyone should be able to get to share in the value. And again, that's one of the model for how to share that revenue is one of the things we're developing as part of this project. Yeah.
Okay, thank you to our speakers, but they're not finished yet. We've got about 20 minutes for questions. There is a roving mic, so if you have a question, please put your hand up. Don't start asking it until you have the mic. This is all being filmed. I'm not really interested in a summary of your CV or lengthy statements, so please keep your questions short so we can get a discussion going. I'll ask the speakers if they can each pick up a mic. Turn it off, obviously, when you're not speaking. Okay, I think the first hand to go up was this lady on the end of the front row. And perhaps if you can say who you represent or where you're from, just to help us know where you're coming from, please.
My name's Claire Birch, and I'm from a farm in Lincolnshire. I'm just interested about the food scoring. what is a negative score? What would be deemed a negative score on the food scoring criteria? Is that a reduction in food production? And how would you calculate that?
I think that's one for Sam.
Yeah, okay, so the food production criterion is a new one, and obviously we're going to have to see how it works in terms of when we're on the evaluation panel. How it's not designed to be a sort of punitive criterion, so it's more about making sure the projects are thinking about the impact. So obviously you can't get a negative score, but obviously you can get a lower score, and you can potentially, that could affect your whether or not you're selected. I think there's sort of three key elements. One is to sort of assess the likely impact of the project on food production. The second is to minimise any negative impact where possible. And then the third is to sort of explain how the project is going to contribute to sort of sustainable food production. Obviously, I can't really go much further on that as to how we're going to assess it exactly, because we've got to run an open and fair competition. Everyone needs the same access to the information. That's the information in the guidance. But essentially, there are elements in there that we've sort of pointed to as to how we've tried not to be too prescriptive and give you a big spreadsheet to show exactly how you would figure it out. But we've pointed to things like yields and livestock units as to how much impact you have. Just because you're reducing food production doesn't necessarily mean you can't score 10, as long as you've explained it well and sort of set out those mitigations and explained why overall it's going to be a positive thing for sustainable food production, whether that be because you're sort of benefiting areas outside of the project or just producing more sustainable food within the project, or both.
So I'm just still confused about what a low score would look like.
I think it would be, it's going to be a poor explanation, basically, not thinking about the proper, the impact on food production at all, just saying, we're going to do all this amazing environmental stuff, it's going to have no significant impact, that sort of thing I would imagine wouldn't score very well. We want people to properly start thinking about it and try and calculate. Obviously, it's going to be tricky to do that, but that'll be the difference between a good application and a poor one.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, we have a gentleman on the front row. Well, it's Jake Fiends.
Fines.
Fines.
You're right, you're from Worcester. Jake Fiends, Landscape Recovery, Pilot 1, Holcombe Estate, Norfolk Coast. I'm intrigued with the blended finance thing for the round 2, because if you're going to be on a designated site, SSSI, SCC, SPA, Ramsar, Nantra 2000, we assume are in favourable condition. And if you baseline it, there's no uplift. So there's no BNG on it. There's no neutrality on it, because it's already delivering. How do you get I just understand the thinking on how you get the corporates to buy into something that's already amazing.
Who wants to have a go at that? Okay, Tim, you look like you're
Why? Oh,
Yep.
Christ. Who are you going to? I was just going to say, I think the markets as they exist at the moment don't look like they're going to deliver on it. But I think there's a massive untapped opportunity going forward in the ESG markets to link habitat maintenance and management with brands that want to associate themselves with the countryside and looking after it. So it's that $1 million question. Does the public money pay for maintenance and the private money pay for creation, or is there something very complicated hybrid? I don't know, but I think there's still people that want to be associated with a beautiful project or a beautiful woodland maintenance and so on, but the mechanisms to value it aren't there. I agree. And I was like nodding.
Okay, we've got second Tim and then back to Sam.
Just add to that, and I think it actually links back into slightly the food question, which we didn't have to answer in the first round, but I think is really interesting, because slightly introducing it reintroduces that false dichotomy between environment and food production, which I just hate. But I think that's why it's relevant, is that to pick off Tim's point, I think as particularly the corporate sector and those who are looking to inset in the food production side come to understand all of the ecosystem services they depend on that allow them to actually deliver their businesses, So I'm talking about things like pollination as an ecosystem service and the general biodiversity that it creates outside of the specific sites. And I think it's about being able to describe how that service is being delivered, and because it is valuable, it should be continue to be paid for and invested in. So to some extent, it's in the creativity in the conversation with the corporates, but the corporates are rapidly coming into that, and there's a thing out there called TNFD, which will probably be a mandatory regulation in the next couple of years, that actually was going to really accelerate that point. I think that's the hook to keep focusing on.
Anything to add, Sam?
Yeah, just to add, and first Tim touched on it, is just, that may well be the area that the public funding, that sort of gap that the public funding fills, either for now or maybe for a long time, depending on whether these markets come in. So, I mean, part of the project development phase, a really key part, is really to get projects to pull together as much private funding as they can, figure out what that gap is, justify that gap, and really clearly show to us and delivery partners that they've done their best in the current state of the markets to fund as much as they can with private money, and then we'll basically fill the gap to the extent that we can. So, I mean, if and that's something we're going to learn from this round one, and also round two, definitely, if we're looking at protected sites, it's going to be a key element, and we'll need to adapt from what we learn in those rounds.
Thank you. In the middle of the second row, and then we'll carry on in the second row.
Thanks very much. Bill Herditch from Sydney, Australia. Fantastic work. Great example for us to follow, I think, in the colonies. This question about how to assess, what are the metrics? What sort of metrics are you going to apply? Or is it just about innovation in metrics, remote sensing of biodiversity, carbon testing, all of the metrics you're going to have to look at to say, have we actually made a difference? What's happening there? I've got a lot to say about additionality, but I'll say it another time.
Thanks. Okay, Sam, and then
I can
Tim.
start. I mean, it's not really in my area. I'm not into, but there's a monitoring and evaluation team at Defra there's sort of two levels of monitoring and evaluation and learning for the scheme. There's a scheme level, and then there's the project level. So projects are bid for funding for their specific project level plan. They're welcome to use whatever metrics they think are most suitable for that project, and a lot of them are sort of getting consultants in to help with that. We've also got a consultant working at the Defra level to sort of give some tips on what we think would be sensible metrics across the board, so that we can ensure there's some consistency where possible, for us to be able to kind of measure the overall impact of the scheme. But I don't know, Tim, if you have something more specific on your front.
I can tell you what we're doing, and that is still exploring it. But I know that Tom and Jenny, who's in there somewhere, and a number of others, and when I was at Dalesford, we all worked on the Sustainable Food Trust's global farm metric, and actually on our Windrush properties, Jenny's running a test and trial there with that, and I see Edward's there, and he's testing that. We'll look at those tests and trials and those metrics, and they do factor food production and social gain and all the other. I think there's 11 different indices being measured. But at the end of the day, you can go down so much detail and into a quagmire. We've got one of probably the most heavily measured and monitored catchments in the country. We've got Oxford University, who are co-funding our data role for monitoring and evaluation. They've got entire departments looking at metrics and monitoring and evaluation. And then we've actually got things in place like Leaf and so on that have been doing it for a while, and organic that are measuring, and there's a lot out there. I think we'll have 22 different answers after round one. But I think we've got to be careful we don't get too bogged down. And going to what Tim was saying, we need to look at what the markets require and the MRV requirements, which is why with the Rothamsted guys, we've been developing, this is my vested interest in Carbon Quester, an affordable baselining, which Bill, for soil carbon specifically. If we can just get that baseline data, that line in the sand, and hopefully whatever Defra requires and whatever we require for the private markets will all fall into place. And then finally, good luck in the next test, which starts in about 10 minutes.
Thank you. Question in the second row from Dominic there.
Thank you. Dominic Buskell from Wild Ken Hill. My question was around the £750,000 spending cap, which strikes me like it could be a real constraint. And I was interested by your project governance slide and the number of people working on the project. It looked like a lot of salary and also probably a lot of people not paying themselves probably very much. So my question was, if you'd be prepared to share, is how much are you actually expecting to spend on the project development phase over the 2 years? What proportion of that is going to be covered by Defra, and what are you going to have to source externally? That would be great to hear that, please.
Okay, Tim, thanks.
So in the round one, we obviously were given a 500,000 grant, which we have to sort of keep reapplying for it. That's the wrong word, but going back for in chunks every quarter, and we sort of have to show our progress, and then we have to, in part of the enrolment was setting out how we thought that spend would be done across the 2-year product development phase. Again, collaboratively with Defra and the EA in particular, who we're attached to there is back and forth on that and that discussion, and one of the discussions we're having to have is all the sort of unexpected additional costs that are created by the existence of government, so VAT, NICs if we're employing people, that kind of thing. We have got quite a lot of people giving time in kind. That has been a key way we have managed to essentially match fund that kind of Defra investment as we're going on. And Tim's mentioned a few things like so Oxford University and others have been doing that. So there is quite a lot of that expenditure, and it's fully Defra funded to a degree, but actually we are seeking the match funding. We're also seeking the sort of grant funding that can come in and support further as we go on that, and discussions with some discussions we're having with investors for the implementation phase are also about that conversation, like in sort of pre-funding to get where we need to go.
Teresa Coffey's in the background. I'll just say incredible value for money from landscape recovery, because there's a hell of a lot of pro bono time that got into this.
Yeah, can I just add to that? Just in terms of the round one projects, the majority of those are within the current cap of £750,000, which I think is important to understand. I guess also it's an up to 2-year project development phase, so we might see more projects coming forwards that have done some of these things already, so they might not need as much funding because they were already quite well established in some regards. And also I would add that we are trying our best to capture the match funding contributions that we are getting, because we're really conscious that people are investing a lot of their time. I was speaking to a farmer who's working 1 day a week on a project in Kent, and he's doing that for free. So we are trying to capture that, because what we need to be able to do is demonstrate back to Defra the true cost of the project development phase and all of the extra input that we're getting from all the various organisations that are supporting the projects.
Thank you. Question at the back here, this gentleman.
Hi, I'm Sebastian from Solitel Consulting.
Can you hold the microphone a little bit closer?
Closer, sorry. For the net zero metric, does it have to be delivered through nature-based solutions, or could, say, a solar farm within the project area also count towards that?
Good question. We're not really considering solar to be in scope. I mean, it could be in the project, but it probably won't contribute towards the score for that criterion. It's largely about kind of land management practices and habitats and whatnot. I can look into that properly and get you a better answer than that one I've just given. We'll make sure it's published on Atomis, which is the application portal, alongside the other questions.
Thank you, Sam. Tim?
I'll just say, ask us again in 12 months, because in the absence of a land use framework that's fit for purpose, we are unpicking that in our own catchment you might be aware of.
Thank you. Question in the corner over there.
Thank you. Morning. Ben Sharples, Mitchell Solicitors. We've been advising on a number of schemes, and one of the issues that we see is structuring things so that private finance can crowd in, and it's an attractive, familiar environment for them. I was wondering how you'd tackled that and how you'd structured things, and I would echo the pro bono comments just made. The estimates for professional fees for structuring agreements of this complexity are I would suggest not adequate, although I doubt there'll be much sympathy for lawyers.
Over to Tim.
Yes, solicitors are very expensive. So how we approach that, we have taken legal counsel on the appropriate structure given the our specific complexities. So one of the again, it requires someone, in this case me, to have written a legal brief for a few solicitor firms. Sorry, I didn't come to you. Maybe next time. And actually, we ended up at the bar. To be honest, to address the sort of range of different legal questions that come in, and it's not just about the corporate structuring; it's everything to do with inheritance tax implications, tenure implications, environmental permitting. You know, there are huge amounts of complexity here, particularly given that there's uncertain and ongoing policy change at the Defra level. So we managed ourselves again. You know, our legal provision is coming in not pro bono, but it is coming in as a significant discount, which we managed to talk them into, slightly because it was interesting and exciting. So I hope that's what gets you out of bed. We have not finalised exactly where we are in terms of the structure. But what we had to take into consideration is that we have an existing CIC, which is the body that the cluster is. That probably will not be the delivery body, is where we've got to, because there are some complexities in using a CIC for that. But that doesn't mean that the cluster CIC is going away. It absolutely isn't. I don't really want to show the hand just yet because we haven't finalised exactly what we're doing. But it's about answering the question of how do we manage all of the needs of the farming participants, and we have 60 plus in just the landscape recovery, with also the needs of making it financially investable. Now, we've got a straw man. We think we know what the answer is, but I'm not sure we're quite ready to tell everyone that.
Okay, thank you. We've got 4 minutes left, time for 2 more questions. We'll take the lady in the corner, please, and then this gentleman in the third row.
Hi, I'm Helen Rhodes and I farm in South Yorkshire. Now, I'm not certain any of you can actually answer my question, but my question relates to this new round. Why is the focus on, it's a bit of an extension to Mr. Fiennes' question, why the focus on the farms that have the best already, the protected landscape, the environment rich? What happens to the rest of us? That you either have or you haven't got that, and if you haven't got that, then mid-tier and that's it. We need more opportunities. And who takes the decisions as to focusing this? Same with higher tier, that's all going that way. Sorry.
Okay, Sam, you
yeah,
have a
I
go
can
at
answer that. Yeah, so I mean, it's although on the face of it, it looks like it's going to be in favour of protected sites and land that has those areas. If you look at the criteria and the scoring, it's split between net zero. On the primary environmental objectives, there's 25 points that go towards net zero, which can be through a variety of things. Habitats or practices, and which any farm can do. Obviously, those endowed with peatland, it's beneficial, but there's various things that you can do to score well against that criterion. And then on the biodiversity side, you can get a full 25 points for wildlife-rich habitat that's outside of protected areas, specifically outside, and then you can get the full 25 points for areas that are within it for improving the condition or maintaining them in good condition or connecting loads up with areas outside as well. And the wildlife rich habitat is, you can create it, you can maintain it. We've kept that loose. If you look at the lists on there, they're really broad. There's hedgerows in there, rivers and streams, ponds, flushes, all sorts in there. So why not? You could because you can get the full 25 points for wildlife-rich habitat outside of those protected areas, and you could get the full 25 points for whatever you're doing on net zero. That get you your 50 points on the primary environmental objectives, and then the other 50 points come across the secondary, the value for money, and the social and the food.
Okay, thanks.
But yeah, I mean,
thanks, Sam. Maybe there's discussion to be had after on that one. Okay, thank you. Last question from this gentleman here.
Hi, Dan Turner from the Rivers Trust, working on a couple of landscape recovery projects and also led on the Wire and NFM investment readiness project. So I think that the private sector is there. I think there is ample money out there. It's just poorly aligned. However, the big question that we get is, what is the public sector commitment? And fundamentally, how is that going to work? And that is the big barrier to bringing them on board. So, blended finance is a key element of landscape recovery. Do we have any clarity on how that is going to work?
Sam,
Yeah, I can have a go with that. I mean, it's not really my area. I could do with Al here, my colleague, but I think that it is a difficult one. There's a full team that are working on our kind of blended finance policy. There are a few things on gov.uk setting out where their vision is going, but we're in a similar position to everyone else in kind of understanding those emerging markets and trying to create policy around that. And it is tricky, and it's going to take some time for us to get it perfect. But I think I'd encourage you to, just sort of try and get your ideas across to us as to what you think would be the best thing to do to, make best use of that private money that's out there.
The final comment on that from Tim. Thank you.
Yeah, I understand that there's guidance coming out to the existing participants imminently, but probably maybe worth sharing that with the applicants for the second round as an idea. And I'm not just saying that because I helped write it. But also from experience, I think the point here is that blended finance is about more than one actor seeking differential returns. The government has different outcomes and objectives than private money does, and it's important. So it's a de-risking thing. Are there things that or market making? Right, that's where the government needs to step in with hard money. But the other thing the government needs to do is, and it's floated around here, is standardisation of what good looks like, what the metrics are. And that kind of thing. And I know there are initiatives going on about that, but that's going to be crucial to de-risk this in the eyes of the private money that does want to come in, but just needs certainty that there's policy certainty and clear intention from government.
Okay, thank you. Please join me in thanking our speakers. If you want to grab them for any follow-on discussions, please feel free. Thank you very much.